Hello, everybody. It's good to see you tonight. How is everybody? Uh, as always, I'm going to be waiting for the first minute or so for everybody to come in. Uh, I hope you all enjoyed this. This is one of my raw takes. This episode, I'm going to be just for this episode, I'm going to be talking about MGTOW and what they call traditionalism, quote unquote. Uh, if you're interested in that, please stick around. I'm going to be the spoilers. I don't like either side of this debate, and I'm going to say some good things about each side, and I'm also going to shit on each side too. So if you want those uh, if you want that kind of thing, let me know. I'm again, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. And I hope that you all have fun with this video. Anyway, so right. So where do I begin? Oh yes, yes. Okay. Here's where I'll begin. I'll begin by talking about the distributist, Dave the distributist. He's a friend of this channel. You can find links to his channel in my friends of the channel list on my channel. So yeah, he's a pretty cool guy. I like some of his opinions. I think I think he's a pretty good guy, overall. Maybe we have our disagreements, but we may have our disagreements, but, you know, I get a lot of mileage out of him. He has a lot of good takes. Um, but he once again stepped into this whole manosphere thing where he started going off about members of the manosphere. He started talking about pickup artists and men's rights activists and MGTOW, or men going their own way. And some of what he said was valid, and other things he said was just bad. Okay, it was just bad. And there's another tiny YouTuber that I'm subscribed to named Dystopian Franchise, and you know what? I'll link to hit. I'll show my screen. Let's see. I'll share my screen with you guys. Share screen, application window. Let's see, Chrome tab. Boom, boom. All right. So you see here. Go down here. Uh, yeah. So dystopian franchise. See this guy? 48 subs. He's actually doing worse than me. Imagine that. I can't believe it. He has a lot more videos though. Um, it's not that his videos are bad. It's just that he has a terrible mic, and he has a terrible mic. And the thing about the thing is, he because he has a terrible mic, he his videos aren't of good quality. Most of them aren't, in my opinion, which is a shame because he has a lot of interesting and insightful things to say. But he made a video recently called Manosphere versus Religious Traditionalism, and immediately started seeing a lot of problems with this uh, video. I started seeing just so many different problems here, and oh gosh, where do I begin? Oh, I get I have all these problems with it. I mean, part of it is that when MGTOW talks about traditionalism, they're really talking about Christian conservatives or people who have a more conservative sexual morality. Is someone who wants to someone who says that men getting married and becoming a father is the height of masculinity. Those types of people, right? That kind of quote unquote traditionalist. That's what MGTOW calls people, right wing conservatives who oppose their movement, or I mean, at least they oppose them. I have yet to see a quote unquote traditionalist who obsesses over the evils of MGTOW, right? It's always the other way around. It's usually the MGTOW types bang on about how bad conservatives are and traditionalists are because they're like, oh well, they don't understand us. They don't understand what's going on. They just want to return back to the 1950s. Yeah, real original guys. Um, Original critique, guys. I'm being sarcastic there, but right. That doesn't mean that the religious traditionalists. If I sound dismissive of the MGTOW types, it's because I personally dislike them. But just because I personally dislike them does not mean that I don't see why they dislike traditionalist conservatives, and I don't see the problems that they see. And in fact, I think in some ways they are more correct than their quote unquote traditionalist counterparts. And I'm going to divide this video into two parts. Like one part, I'm going to be talking about what I like about the traditionalists, and then before shitting on them. And then the other part, I'm going to be talking about what I like about MGTOW, and then shitting on them. All right. So now that you've gotten 7 minutes of ranting out of the way, uh, I want to give a huge thank you to all 5 people who are um, watching me. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the show. Um, so now let's talk about these quote unquote traditionalists. What are they like? Well, these traditionalists, generally speaking, have a kind of Christian masculine Christian view of uh, politics. Now, Christian masculinity was a movement that came out of the 19th century. It's like Christian manliness. It's a concept, Christian manliness. It came out of the 19th century, and it was essentially this kind of Protestant movement that focused on this kind of moral masculinity. The idea that we should promote physical. Tell me if you doesn't. Tell me if this doesn't sound familiar. We should promote the male body, the health and physical strength of the male body, and because that has some spiritual value. We should romanticizing marriage and family and romantic love as necessary for human and manly dignity, and the idea the idea of patriotism as being an extension of service to Christ, and this kind of nature, kind of a conservationist attitude towards nature. We're in charge of nature, but nature gives us such pleasing aesthetics, and compared to urban areas. So we want to preserve nature as this beautiful spiritual thing, right? So those are the 4 parts of Christian manliness: um, placing spiritual uh, placing spiritual importance on physical health and strength, uh, maintaining that marriage and the family are necessary for human dignity, patriotism, and conservationism. That's the kind of thing that you would see in Christian manliness. This came out of the 19th century, and and it's mainly around the second of those things, the this kind of idea of family and romantic love being unnecessary for human dignity that MGTOW take offense to. Because, MGTOW says, under the current legal system, under the current cultural climate, we have a situation wherein it's pretty much impossible to have the traditional husband, wife, and two kids and white picket fence, homemaker and homemaker and breadwinner combo. That kind of 1950s picture is just gone. Okay, it existed only in the boomer era, and now that the boomer era is gone, now that we have the sexual revolution, we can't put the genie back in the bottle. Like, once we have the birth control, once we have like no fault divorce, once we have abortion, once we have all of those things, we can't just pretend like these things didn't happen. We can't just pretend. We can't just say, "Oh, we gotta go to marriage and family and stuff." Nuh-uh, no. That's very difficult for the majority of men to do nowadays, and it might be impossible for the majority of men to undertake this. Like, in this cultural climate, only like the chaddest of the giga chads, as they would say, uh, can possibly afford to find the right woman and that won't abandon him and have marriage and kids and traditional family. That's that's just not an option for the majority of men anymore. And why is that? Well, it's the same for the same reasons that traditionalists complain about sexual revolution, feminism, and so on. Those kinds of things. They so while the image that the traditionalists harken back to aesthetically is very pleasing, it's just not realistic in our current cultural climate. And honestly, it might not it might be something parochial to 1950s America. It might be something that only 1950s America could have accomplished, because in traditional societies, i.e., before the 19th century, we had women working. They didn't work. They didn't work like in factories as breadwinners like they do now, but they they didn't work in offices, but they worked, and they worked very hard alongside their husbands on their farms, or in their family stores. It wasn't exactly this you know, the housewife just staying at home and doing house chores all day. That's not something that happened for most of human history. True that women were more domestic than men because of the physical burdens of childbearing, but that's not really the same thing as the stay-at-home housewife that might never come back again, and we're just going to have to accept that. So I guess this is one of the main problems with the traditionalists, and this is like the main problem I have with traditionalists overall is they don't have a vision for what a traditionalist woman looks like that is realistic. That's kind of a it's kind of an interesting take, but let me elaborate. So, I mean, like any good MGTOW guy would point out, we can't just go back to the 1950s and uh, expect trad marriage to work because of divorce courts and things like that. We can't expect trad marriage to work at this juncture. So, what do we do? What we would do is we should try and come up with what masculinity looks like in the current situation. Like, what would the ideal man look like? And to do that, we need a reference to the ideal woman. What does the ideal woman look like in modernity, in post-modernity? What does the ideal man and woman look like in post-modernity? It can't be like the 1950s housewife and the 1950s breadwinner. That's gone. That's going to die with the boomers. Okay. So traditionalists, I don't think they can I don't think they've come up with an adequate idea of what a woman should be that isn't just like 1950s housewife. That's one problem. But I think another problem is that in a lot of ways they can't do that. And the reason they can't do that is because if they were to come up with like the ideal of what the ideal woman would look like in post-modernity, then they would have to impose that onto women. Using like they would have to sort of morally impose these kinds of duties onto women. They would have to tell women, look, this is your duty. You have to do this, or you're a bad person. Okay? And traditionalists are more than willing to do this to men. In fact, everyone is doing this to men. The problem is women, as this because of feminism, women are part of this political coalition, and nobody's allowed to make them do anything except what the political coalition wants, right? You can't. The only people who are allowed to tell women what they ought to do is the feminist sisterhood. Other than that, you can't tell women what to do. You can't have like these moral oughts placed on them. And traditionalists have sort of um, a lot of them have bought into that hook, line, and sinker. And I have a term for this. It's called Victorian feminism. Okay, comes from the Victorian era. If you go back and read about the Victorian era, you'll find that there was this attitude towards women at the time that women had no sexual drive. Women were just these kinds of overly moral angels. In fact, it was this kind of attitude that led to female suffrage, because the idea was that women were more moral than men. So if we gave them the vote, it would lead to a more moral society. Well, look how that turned out. And that's done wonders, right? Besides this being kind of patronizing to women, it's also blatantly false, because this kind of Victorian feminism led to all kinds of not only has led to all kinds of degenerate moral attitudes in the modern day, but it obviously goes against the general attitude of people back in the day. What is the archetype of the seductress? The woman that leads good men into disrepute. the woman who charms men into her wiles and seduces them into doing evil, right? That sort of archetype has been around since the biblical Eve. Um, that's not really that's sort of lost on people, and especially these trads, because these trads think that, oh, women are just always victims of women are just these victims of stuff, you know, victims of this sexual revolution. Well, the sexual revolution might have been bad for them. Yes, it was bad. Trads, you're correct. The sexual revolution was, objectively speaking, bad for women. But do you know was who were the main drivers of the sexual revolution? Feminists, right? Feminists were some of the main drivers of the sexual revolution, and women in general bought into that. Why? Well, because because they thought female empowerment was good or something. They women have been getting seduced into. It's kind of funny because women have historically been seductresses, but they themselves are seduced by modernity and its promises of empowerment, to the point where they have this there's this group think among a certain type of woman that wants empowerment and freedom and equality, to the point where they'll fall for, or like, blatant advertisements that psychologically manipulate them. A perfect example of this was, historically, there was an advertisement campaign done by Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud. And this advertisement campaign base was for a cigarette. And they said that, if you smoke this cigarette, that means you are empowered and free from men and stuff like that. And they bought this. They bought this hook, line, and sinker. Sales for this cigarette went through the roof. Why? Because these advertisement people saw that, if we could sell this product, as this consumerist product, as female empowerment, we'll have boatloads of money. And this has been the relationship between feminism and corporations from the beginning. It's been like this from the beginning, and so this Victorian conservative attitude, this kind of uh, a female archetype of the seductress, and this kind of empowerment corporate advertisement. Um, these kinds of things are just part of a larger picture that traditionalists, as MGTOW pejoratively call them, which really they're basically Christian conservatives and people who share that attitude. Um, they just don't get it, right? And what does this all add up to? Well, it all adds up to, you know, a bunch of traditionalists who come across as weak and dysfunctional, and all they do is pick on men who complain about the system, right? That's what happens, right? A perfect example of this was um, Dave's video on incels, where he just tells them to suck it up, because suck it up and support traditional marriage. Basically, that's the summarization of the video. He just tells men that they should just let women choose. Women should just be the ones who choose everything, as if there isn't such a thing as hypergamy, right? He doesn't even address hypergamy. Presumably, it would be solved through marriage, like traditional marriage would solve the problem of female female hypergamy in large part, because and for those of you who don't know, hypergamy is this idea that women they they just go from man to man according to who is the most Chad. How men are attracted have kind of polygamous sexual uh, uh, there's a certain sexual vicious the sexual vice that men fall into is polygamy, where they want a bunch of women, a kind of a harem, and the vice women fall for is hypergamy, where it's not a bunch of men all at once, but rather one man after another, after another, after another. Right. That's that, and divorce allows women to female hyper empowers female hypergamists, according to like the manosphere argument. And trads don't really address this as often because again they have this idealized view of women that they inherited from the Victorian era. Okay, so I've been shitting on trads. Time to talk about MGTOW, right? So Dave in his video goes over the three main groups of the manosphere, and he talks about which are the pickup artists, the men's rights activists, and the men going their own way. PUAs, MRAs, and MGTOW. All right. So PUAs, pickup artists, he dismisses as grifters, right? Which is and he maybe he should have been clear in dystopian franchise, the guy I talked about earlier. He's like, well, how are they grifters? They're teaching other men the secrets of their craft. Well, to give an analogy, use the Vosh analogy. That would be like Vosh going onto a live stream and saying, right, guys, this is how you can copy what I'm doing right now and make oodles of money doing political Twitch streaming, right? If Vosh were to do that, would he be less of a grifter? No, all he would be doing is just training people how to be grifters like him, right? Bosch is a grifter. He is corrupt because what he's doing is he's not making things better. What he's doing is giving himself profiting off of what he admits to be a broken system. And what are PUAs doing? They're profiting off of what they admit to be a broken system. And in that sense, they are like Vaush in being grifters. Now you can say, oh, that's not really grifting. Well, okay, but it's still kind of a shitty thing to do, right? So those people are out. You also have MRAs, and Distributist takes these people to task too, because what are MRAs doing? Well, they're begging the power structures to recognize human rights that have never existed before, and they have no reason to exist, even though the system itself profits from their disenfranchisement, right? So MRAs, those are out because they have no realistic way of getting what they want. And Dave also makes the point of saying, well, what they want isn't really going to solve anything because it's not going to solve the problems of the sexual revolution. And fair is fair. That's also true of them. Although I would say that what Dave said about how there was a mythical moment in between sexual revolution and feminism where women suffered, and I'm like, dude, right? Feminism was behind the sexual revolution from day one. Okay, if women suffered, it was mainly their fault. Okay, if women suffered, it was because of other women. All right. So Uh, then we come to MGTOW, and he says, MGTOW are in some ways they're the best, in some ways they're the worst. Um, the idea of MGTOW, when I first came across MGTOW, I found the idea to be fascinating, honestly. As a person in a personal message, I think the MGTOW people just have the right idea about the system that we're in right now. The MGTOW types know that this kind of system feeds off of the disenfranchisement of men, and they see this, and they're very correct that we need to we should be angry at this because this is an unjust system, uh, and they have a proposed solution, which is we're not going to get married. Now, Protestants might throw their hands up in the air at this, but as a Catholic, that seems pretty sensible, actually. Vows of chastity, vows of vows of swearing off marriage, that kind of thing is not foreign to the Christian tradition. In fact, St. Paul actually commends people who do this. He even commends married couples and saying that it'd be better for them to be celibate. Uh, he allows people who can't control their sexual urges to do it in the do the deed in the context of marriage, right? So, yeah, it was a positively, that was the kind of radical message that the early Christians had. And, MGTOW types, they can recapture some of that. If they can recapture some of that radicalism in these broken times, that would be a huge boon for our side spiritually. It would be men would, they talk about men liberating themselves from women. What better way to do that than to sort of swear them off and say, we are going to be chaste, and we're going to be chaste. We're going to not have these kinds of relationships because right now, because marriage was supposed in the Christian context was supposed to be a way for people to have sex in a way that is sacralized. Christian marriage is a way of sacralizing sex so that it doesn't it doesn't destroy a person. And it's very important to regulate the sexual passions to this degree because it can easily destroy a person. The we can talk about the 8 daughters of lust later on in this video, but suffice to say, sex destroys a person. Just look at any simp, and you can see that. uh, Now, the problem is that MGTOW are not really free. They are enslaved, not if not to real women, than to pornography, right? And Dave points this out, but Dystopian Franchise doesn't really address this at all in his video, at least as far as I'm aware. Maybe he did somewhere in the depths of his video. I don't know. His video is like 37 minutes long. Maybe somewhere he did it and I just missed it. But if he does address it, he didn't give much time or energy to it. And that was one of the main criticisms Dave had of MGTOW, that they're obsessed with 2D women, and they're basically they like pornography. They like sex toys and sex dolls. I've seen some of them talk about how they want artificial wombs to replace women. You know, that's not that's not healthy behavior. Okay, you're not. Uh, how that is freedom from women? Yeah, I guess you could say it's freedom from women in the very loose sense, and that you don't have to be subject to the whims of a living woman, and instead you can indulge in some fantasy lover that will match everything, that'll be anything you want, no matter what. Um, this kind of shadowy harem that is always at your beck and call. That's how C.S. Lewis described them. Uh, but you become enslaved to your lust. You are enslaved to your vice, and that leads you down the path of destruction. But also, it allows you to become controlled politically by the people who make this porn and this porn and this kind of thing. It makes you into a coomer that is controlled, and you don't want to be that way. If your goal is literally to be free, then what's the point of being freed from one master only to serve a master who is possibly even worse? What's the point of being free from women when you become enslaved to pornography and to sexual addiction? So that's one problem with MGTOW, and that's a huge problem that I don't see it being addressed. Another problem is that, Dave also points this out. MGTOW people are basically envious. They're envious of men who manage to, under this system, find a wife and find happiness in that sense, right? They see men who are successful despite the system, and they resent them, and they crow on, and they say, "Oh well, your wife is going to leave you. You're going to be alone and scared." And they fill Dave's 3-year-old videos comment section. Like, I can, if I mean, actually, let's go through the comment section of some of Dave's old MGTOW videos, because let's go and see, right? Because Dave has some videos that are um, a few years old, but Distributist. Let's see, Distributist has some old videos on MGTOW. Sidle death, just act MGTOW. All right, all right, all right. So, okay. Uh, so I got this. All right. So Jan 7th, 2017, blah, blah, blah. All right. So I'm going to share my screen again. Share screen. Share screen. Application window. Let's go to. All right. So here. All right. Let's go down to the comments section. Had no arguments about. Let's see. All right. So we got this. Interesting. Uh, let's see. So yeah, this one stood out to me. This one says, so he says, distributist. This was made 4 years ago, which makes it hilarious in hindsight. Distributist gets married 3 to 5 years later. Wife submits divorce papers. Family judge. On what grounds? Wife. I'm unhappy. Oh wait, irreconcilable differences. That's a technical term under no fault divorce. Judge, okay, alimony and child support granted. You will receive $1,000 per child per month, plus $1,000 in alimony, plus the distributor's retirement accounts and home. Distributors, wait, Judge, I'd like to say something. Okay, go ahead, distributors. I see marriage not as a contract, but as noble cause of self-sacrifice, etc., etc. Judge, okay, distributors, talk to your legislator about divorce laws. Good luck. Wait, but, thank you. All gavel comes down. Okay, so this is basically somebody who is uh this is okay, that comment was hilarious. Basically, like, these people keep talking about, like, how you know they they that's not something you do to, like, a brother, right? You I understand why someone would become resentful under if someone happened to succeed under these kinds of systems, right? But that comment just screams, "I am envious of you," right? He this That's a fantasy of somebody, uh, Dave, getting ruined by his wife, who, for all intents and purposes, they seem to have a happy marriage going on, right? I don't see the two of them breaking up anytime soon. Now, God willing, right? God willing. But I don't see the two of them breaking up. They seem to have a very strong and strong relationship. They seem to be a very deep relationship. They're both Catholic, religious. You know, now we can appreciate. Yeah, maybe MGTOW is right. In that kind of relationship, doesn't really happen. It doesn't really happen all the time. These doesn't really happen that often. I mean, both Dave and his wife come from a highly religious community who that value, and both of them highly value the sacrament of marriage, and it's not really it's not really something that you can disregard. Fair enough, fair enough. But I think that what does that comment say about that person, right? What does that say about what does MGTOW say? That kind of resentment. MGTOW shouldn't be resenting the people like Dave, right? Okay, maybe they can get annoyed with Dave being, like, naive about women, or uh, Dave complaining about their behavior. Yeah, but to be annoyed because somebody was successful in this field when you weren't, that's just envy. Okay, that's just you being envious, and envy is evil. All right, envy negates the justness of your anger. Because if you are angry at someone not for some evil that they caused you, but because of the good that they have, that they got, through their own, they obtained through their own merits, despite of the system that you admit is broken. Isn't that something heroic that should be celebrated? A rare occurrence in our postmodern cynical age? I think that's food for thought, really. Ah, okay. I'm glad I got that off my chest. Now, um, uh, so I've got that all settled. Now, thank you for watching. I'd like to answer your questions about my hot takes. If you like them, leave comments. I'd love to talk about some of the stuff. I see Focron. Uh, I see that he started talking. Let's share some of his comments here, and I'll read them out loud. He says first, trad is a praxeology for cohering men and women so as to have a functioning society. Applied at the individual level, absent broader societal scaffolding, you get simps and incels. Well, that's certain. There is a certain amount of truth to it, to that. But I don't think most trads see themselves as simply trying to maintain society. Uh, or at least if they try to appeal to MGTOWs that way, that's not really what really drives them. A lot of them are driven by traditional sexual morality, and they see MGTOW people poo-pooing the sacrament of marriage. And if you poo-poo the sacrament of marriage, that's not a good thing. I mean, it's understandable that you could become cynical about like the application of the principle in modern times due to a corrupt legal system. But yeah, in my experience, just speaking personally, right? When sometimes when a moralist speaks to someone who is kind of more nihilistic and materialistic and atheistic, what they'll do is try to justify their moral principles by appealing to the self-interest of the other person. And sometimes that works. Sometimes it's dismissed out of hand. I think personally that uh, that sort of thing is um, sometimes. I mean, that sort of thing can work when it comes to power politics. But if you have somebody who can see through your power politics game, uh, I don't think it works for like intellectual arguments. I think it's best for that a traditionalist, quote unquote, be honest about why they really want traditionalism, and the reason they really want traditionalism is because they have a traditional sexual morality, and they should defend their stance on those grounds. Because I personally think those are intellectually stronger than any of the and kind of, oh, society needs marriage or else it would collapse. Well, yeah, that's true in a sense, but like, is society going to collapse if some men decide I'm going to go my own way and become bachelors? I don't think so. I don't think so. Uh, Next part, it says, Uh, they're two halves that don't work without each other. Manosphere thinking raises the individual man's value to women, and Tradism provides the set of rules and structures that keep both sexes in a certain window of behavior that allows civilization to function. Well, maybe that could work in like if you had a synthesis of like the manosphere view and the quote unquote trad view. But I don't want a synthesis of those two views. I want something completely different because I hate both of those views. Okay. I really don't like either one of those views because I've spent like the past 45 minutes talking about all the problems I have with both sides of this argument. And believe me, and especially with with the trads and their neither one of these sides neither of these sides has a an idea of what femininity and masculinity look like in postmodernity, right? Neither one of them. And you can't have masculinity without femininity. Okay, we are a sexually dimorphic species. All right, so the ideal man, any talk about what an ideal man would look like can't be cannot be complete. Any image of what the ideal man looks like cannot be complete without an image of the ideal woman. And if we can't, and with these ideals becomes moral duties that are imposed onto people. Okay, and he says, what's missing from both groups is the concept of duty and sacrifice. Marriage is nothing but duty. Duty to each other, duty to civilization, to God. The pyramid of magisterium starts with that at the bottom. Well, that's a pretty interesting view, and I think there's a lot to that. On the surface, it's agreeable, although I'll have to meditate on that and see whether it's very good. And he says finally, in the modern world, most people cannot truly understand what duty means. Well, exactly. What does duty mean? Duty means um, doing things, doing something to doing something you have to do in order to you might not in order to acquire a difficult good, right? We are used in the modern world, we're used to having things come easy to us, and and in reality, uh, we have to have some level of magnanimity. I think it's the word magnanimity, the which is the virtue of being of pursuing a higher good, pursuing a higher good at the cost of higher good because it is a higher good, and striving to achieve something higher than oneself. And that's very difficult to do. And I think a lot of people in the modern world just have forgotten that. So I think you're 100% right here, Folkron. Most people in postmodernity can't do that. Um, And finally, we had Mohammed here saying MGTOW is cringe. Yes, MGTOW is cringe, but so is the trads that MGTOW rails against, insofar as they adhere to this kind of Victorian feminist ideal. In fact, I have some books on my shelf, Seven Deadly Sins. Because I do not like trads so much, let me quote like extensively a chapter from The Bad Catholic's Guide to the Seven Deadly Sins by John Zmirak. And there's a part of it that says the first chapter is about lust, the deadly sin of lust. And let me quote this. Now, let me read this out loud, starting in page 5. Newsflash: women incapable of sin. When the subject of lust pops up, men typically bear the blame. Male sexuality is more outgoing and external than female, and to careless Christians can seem somehow more deeply fallen. The fact of sexual difference, which God created and judged as good, and he's entitled to his opinion, leads some addled Catholic moralists to try reanimating the corpse of Queen Victoria. The zombie they revive is the late romantic stereotype of men as lustful predators and women as hapless victims, a notion that would have puzzled such biblical figures as Samson and John the Baptist. St. Augustine would have just laughed. But guilt-soaked modern Catholic men who've misread their Mariology can fall victim to this self-styled new feminists who peddle such twaddle, typically by appealing to their chivalry. I saw this botched experiment performed before my very eyes in the course of a single dinner. There were the four of us: myself, an academic colleague of mine, a 60-something salt of the earth, sarcastic Yankee pastor, and a smart Midwestern seminarian on the brink of ordination. The beer was flowing freely, into my glass anyway, and we're having the kind of conversation laymen have with priests these days. which means that topics arose that I'm confident never came up between clergy and laity in previous centuries. In contexts like these, I feel a little uncomfortable, constrained to somehow convey the following points. One, I know that you're not one of the bad ones. Isn't it a shame how a few pervy priests and a lot of feckless bishops put good men like you under a shadow? Two, I know you don't say the traditional liturgy, but I hope you'll consider it, since it really is a superior expression of the meaning of the sacrament to the Norvis Ordo, which is all you've ever said. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Three, I've got a pretty good idea how thankless, lonely, and tough your job really is. We really do appreciate you guys. Here, let me pick up that check. Four, no, I don't have a vocation. If we talked for another half an hour, you wouldn't ask. In the course of the evening, a topic came up that rang certain alarm bells and almost got me pounding on the table. It was nothing doctrinal. The heresy computer that Reverend John Hardin, S.J., soldered into my head didn't register anything dangerous. By contrast, when I went to the campus ministry in college, that the dang thing kept going off like a Geiger counter at Chernobyl. Instead, the issue at hand was something pastoral and subtle. Normally, that's the kind of thing I'd miss. Indeed, as I've always said of my taste in art and apologetics, Hulk no like subtlety. It confused him. Then it make him mad. Perhaps because it's an intellectual mistake I've made myself and paid for it in tears and treasure. This error alarms and upsets me, like finding the head of a rat floating in my soup. It's hard to just eat around it. We were talking about the prevalence of abortion and its roots in its root causes in modern sexual behavior. We'd already agreed on quite a bit that women got a raw deal in the sexual revolution, which touted the horn dog fantasies of adolescent boys as the model of liberated behavior. We agreed that feminism was, in a sense, the bloody revenge, insisting on legal abortion so young women could equal the field with men and minimize the consequences of promiscuity. We agreed that many of the women who have abortions pay a terrible psychological price. So far, so good. But then the seminarian offered this theory, which I'm paraphrasing as closely as I can. Quote, women who have premarital sex and abortions are only looking for love. Most of them have had poor relationships with their fathers, and they're seeking substitutes for that paternal love they never had. And men take advantage of that. That's why if we're going to change the abortion culture, it's going to have to be men whose attitudes we change. Men have to take responsibility for this, and they have to be the ones who learn how to say no to premarital sex. This quote unquote this earnest Orthodox gentleman who studied in Rome and who's willingly embracing lifelong celibacy and practical poverty to serve the church, which is more than I'd ever do, had clearly been doing his reading. Indeed, he sounded like he was reading off a script from some pious text or other he'd been assigned at a pastoral seminar by a well meaning pro life feminist. To this I responded, what planet are you from? Which kind of stopped the conversation cold. It's a good thing I was prepared with a 2-minute monologue detailing all the many shades and colors of utter nonsense he just uttered. In sum, I said, less eloquently, I bet, granted there are women who blunder into premarital sex because they're exploited by older or more sophisticated men who lie to them, who promise a lifelong commitment in return for a one-night stand. And some of these girls get pregnant, feel abandoned, and have abortions. But is that really the average profile of a woman who has premarital sex? A clueless, damaged damsel who isn't driven by any sexual desires of her own, but is instead searching for pure and perfect love, dragged down by the grubby cravings of filthy men? Is the average unmarried American woman who is, by all accounts, sexually active an emotional basket case whose father left her wounded, vulnerable to exploitation by heartless Y chromosomed hedonists? If so, she is barely culpable for any sexual sins, and hardly to be blamed for having an abortion. We should treat her purely as a victim, and not as a rational adult with free will who committed a sin. Why bother to absolve her, much less excommunicate her? Is this the outcome of the pro-life insistence that we never foresee any legal penalty for women who have abortions, only the doctors? If so, the price is too high. Have you ever dated? In fact, have you ever met any women? The ones I've known don't fit that description, including the ones who don't practice perfect chastity. In my limited experience, women have sexual desires too. They are capable of making rational decisions and should be held responsible for them, just like men. Why do they go out and have sex when they know they shouldn't? Here's a theory: original sin. And about your idea of making men the gatekeepers, expecting that since women are pretty much helpless, it's going to fall to guys to be new enforcers of chastity. Good luck with that one. uh, so yeah, that if there's look, I don't like John Samara all the time, but man, does he nail that one. I never ever since I read that passage, I have not been a quote unquote trad. I have seen through this kind of frankly malarkey that some conservative type Christian types have. And many of these conservative Christians are well meaning. But the problem is, again, they don't have an idea of an ideal woman. And that as a result, and that results from their being unable to put any moral responsibility on women for living up to that ideal. Right. Okay. I think I've done enough for tonight. Well, I hope everyone enjoys that little tidbit. I hope everyone loves to hear me rant for an hour. If you like this, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And have a good evening. Good night, everyone.